Hello everybody and good evening to you all. We are engraving here in Hisingen outside Gothenburg, the fourth largest island in Sweden, known for its industrial capacity and the birthplace of Volvo. We had a very lovely day with nice autumn temperature, around 10 to 12, which is quite warm and pleasant. And today I will make a different take on Rappaport, because I'm a firm believer in making things from different angles to make it possible to understand. It's better to watch something from a distance first and then from different directions, from left, from right, and especially good it's to see something from a completely other subject. And I think that's one of the reasons we had such a success with the lectures, because we are mixing from all areas. We are not shy for anything. Maybe we should incorporate even more things. I think this could be a point to broaden us even more. I myself have subjects I don't particularly like economics. Maybe that should be included. I don't know. Well, let's see. I've been talking earlier about different gestalt, and the present gestalt that Rappaport in his article tries to get a grip on. He tries to show us what is the current gestalt and what is the gestalt of the Klein model. And this helps to understand where are we and what is the reality of quantum physics. And it makes a lot of sense, because if you are going somewhere, like we can see it as a path, we're going to quantum physics. In order to go somewhere, we need to know where we are presently. What do we have? What is classical physics? What is, as Rappaport called, the Aristotelian Boolean logic? What is the law of the excluded middle? All those questions. And where is the destination? How does that look? So we find the right path, the right direction. And I think both those things need to be very firmly established if you want to go from A to B. Otherwise, you will not be going from the right place. And part of that reason is the subject is included. In our normal educational system, we completely ignore the subject. We say there is one objective knowledge, and usually that knowledge is often cast in only the explicit form, which is completely, this is a very generalized look at how knowledge works. Take the words and you get the knowledge. You don't need the body, you don't need anything implicit. It doesn't have to be any reality, is that what they try to infer. And that is a very good trait to understand the current gestalt. In the current gestalt there is no reality. So what we mean, our currency for knowledge today, we already know, is just the surface. And we are satisfied with that. And that is one of the points that Rappaport is doing. We got used to this humble diet of knowledge that is not very thoroughly, and we know that also. That's very important. It's no illusion for our bodies that we don't have proper knowledge. That is one of the reasons Plato and Aristotle were so forceful in their look for knowledge, and that it almost destroyed their lives. And I think there are two paths you can take in today's world. One path is you give up somewhere, you say that there's no proper knowledge. I can just have the words, that's going to be fine. It doesn't give me much satisfaction, it doesn't help me in my regular life, it doesn't help me to live a full and enriching life, doesn't help my career, it doesn't do any good. So I have it in a compartment, in a box, and I take it like a game of chess or something, and say, here I have the knowledge and I can use it Thursday between 12 and 1 o'clock. Something like that. We make do, we get used to not knowing the world. And that is part and parcel of the central perspective world. Yes, it's an easier way to paint. In a way it is actually. It's much easier to learn, but it doesn't give you as much. It's not that creative. It's deadening. It's cold, it's sterile. It's lacking luster, it's lacking depth. And I think a good example I remember many years ago, it was it's a hyperbole, I don't know how to pronounce it. Överdrift in Swedish.
Overstatement.
Yeah, overstatement, but more like ridiculous overstatement, and complete hyperbole. I can't pronounce it. God, it's Greek, is it? Yeah, that's why it's poor Greek to me. I remember in the cafeteria when I started university to read English, and there was these two girls, and they were going to get some fika, which is Swedish for some sweetbread and coffee in Swedish. Could be tea, usually it's coffee, and a bun. And one girl said, well, let me serve you the coffee and bread. And the other girl said, no, we are at the university now. You have to say, let me prepare you for your consumption of the bread device. And I think this exaggerated picture is almost true. What we think about knowledge now, it's just the words somehow. And if you change the words, you become knowledgeable. And of course that's going to feel empty. But here comes in the song, Is That All There Is by Peggy Lee. And I will try to incorporate that into the video one time. But we've given up somehow. We think there is nothing more. We can just imitate knowledge. We're going to be happy with that. And I had a friend who studied philosophy with him, Marcus, and he sort of gave up somehow. There's no smartness in the world. I can't learn anything, he said. And I said, don't you think it's boring? And he gave me this complete given up gaze. It was completely empty. And you could really see he was missing something, but he knew there was no intellectual life in this world. And I think most of us give up at some instance, and then we just go through the motions. And it's pretty horrifying in a bit. But this is not to amuse you, this is to give characteristics. What is the central perspective? Yes, it's like Hockney said, completely boring. It's deadening the picture, but it's also what we gotten used to. We are used to this really meager food of knowledge, where everything is at a distance. It doesn't have a body, it doesn't give us pleasure, and above all, it does not give us guidance how to rule our lives, not at all. And This is something I mentioned a lot of times. We know today we are rational. Our planning seldom, if ever, leads to success. And usually our plans today are hardly any better than complete chance. But that's not what I want to talk to you about today. And much more, this is where we are now. But where do we want to go? Yes, we want to go to the Klein bottle. Klein bottle is quantum physics. Quantum physics is proven to be the proper reality. And I think you really already understood now. That's where all the good parts are. That's where the nice stuff is. That's the proper reality. Knowledge can only come from quantum physics. There's no other way to reach knowledge. It won't have any depth anyway. Of course, by using a Bohmian phrase, you can reach the explicit, where you can have the explicit, but you cannot have the implicit. Because in our gestalt, in our central perspective, the implicit is hidden. We just have the surface, we don't have the depth. But we can get the depth. Well, quantum physics is where everything originated. So what Rappaport is showing, the central perspective, our photographic view of reality, is a projection from something greater. And as you all know, a projection is, if you take the globe of the Earth and you project it to make a map, one wonders, is the map a correct representation of the globe? Is the Earth correctly represented in the map? How accurate is the map to the globe? And I would ask Kalle here, how accurate is it?
It's not accurate. We know that Iceland or Greenland is far too big.
It's far too big. Actually, the projection going from the globe to a map, it's only correct in one single point.
At the equator.
It's at the equator at one point. Nowhere else. The projection going from the fourth dimension, the Klein bottle, to the central perspective, it's somewhat similar, because you can compare those. And the deviation, alltså avvikelsen, it's not foreseeable, it's not the same, it varies. So we can't know in what way the deviation is. So you have two factors. There's a deviation, and we don't know the degree of deviation because that varies. And that's the world we're living in. This is the live world. This covers all areas of living. There's no exception. It's not a special place somewhere and you have knowledge anyway. No, everything is sort of distorted or something. So the goodest stuff is on where the source is. I think there is a saying, not in Swedish and not in English, I think it's in German, you should drink directly from the well. Die Quelle hat die beste Wasser. Something like that, I don't remember it. But get it from the source. Don't get it second hand or third hand or fourth hand. Because it's bound to change in ways you don't know. If you know how it changed, then you can make a calculation or some sort, but you don't know how it changed. You don't have any evidence. Information is lost, as it said in physical terms, in scientific terms. But what it means is you have no idea. You cannot have an idea. So the goody stuff is in the holographic. And this is why I used the hologram earlier. Well, the idea is Bohm, not mine. But Bohm wants to show us our regular picture of the world, that the world is a photograph. It's partly right in some aspects, but it's a projection. So it's only one point in the photograph is correct, the rest is distorted. So, well, so the question I want to ask here, and this is common misconception that Rappaport brings up, and I can just read, you don't have to. What is the price for changing from central perspective to a wider, more encompassing, broader holographic viewpoint? What's the price? What are we losing? What's the loss? Because I think that's an obvious question. Even if you don't pose it, we need to know, what am I losing out? It has to be some cost. Because, for instance, if I want to lose weight, I have to go on a diet. That's a sort of a loss, because it's a strain. And when I lost the weight, I had to keep the diet. If I want to get good condition, I had to put in a lot of exercise hours. That's the price I pay.
So to give a comparison with the central perspective, that you focus all the power there. For instance, Paris, with the capital, you focus all the power there with the central perspective. Of course, Paris loses if you go to the encompassing broader and the provinces gain more.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting point actually. Something is losing. What's in the center of the central perspective should lose somehow. And very good point, Kalle. I think that's very intuitive. Yeah, very intuitive. Very, very good. Oddly enough, it's not correct. But it's a perfectly good comment anyway. But oddly enough, it is not correct. Because the really weird workings of a hologram, and the hologram is like the word, and you would think, because Paris gets into the center, I completely agree with you, because I think I've been painting for many years and I thought that as well, and I think that's completely intuitive and normal question to ask. It should be asked. It should also be answered, and the answer is, oddly enough, no, because every single piece of the central perspective have lost something, but in every little piece in the hologram has everything. And there is a difference between the example of the globe and the map here, because the lost is for everything. For instance, even if Paris is in the middle, Paris in itself is more central. Yes, that's correct. But in the hologram, the Paris contains the whole world. Every piece of the hologram contains the whole world. So now you only have Paris, and you have a dim representation of the depth of Paris, because even Paris is hologrammatic. Every little piece of Montmartre contains the rest of Paris. Every little piece of building block in a building, maybe the building block for Notre Dame or something like that, contains the whole of Paris. And this is the odd thing. There is just gain in the hologram. And this is one of the weirdest things to understand, because the hologram is tricky. That's completely agreed. It's a really, really weird device. I was thinking of buying one, but actually looking at it, it doesn't really help. You need to understand the theory by the hologram, that every little piece contains the whole. And this is so weird. This is actually very, very different from ordinary thinking. And there is a reason that Bohm points to this hologram so often. And the reason is it's completely different from everything else we know in the world. It's just not out of this world. So what we are losing is zero. We're not losing anything. And I think that will help with the understanding what is the other Gestalt. Everything that we have in our world is coming from the other Gestalt. We are projecting from that. So all the knowledge we have is there, but there is an incredible loss. And the loss is just beyond belief. The distortions here are much graver than in between the globe and the map. The distortions can be so wild it doesn't even look like the original. Because even if you have from one hologram, let's say a hologram can easily give 100,000 photos, 1 million photos. But let's say you have an average of 1,000 photos. That's something I read in Bohm on the very good site David Bohm's Society. I can recommend. Even if you have so many photos, you have no idea what the reality is. You could be so far off because the relations get completely distorted in the central perspective in the photo. So you don't know the relations within a single point. Nothing makes any sense anymore. And the loss is there for zero. There's no loss at all. And when we're starting to get to this more encompassing, wider picture of the world, we will notice that we gain in every little inch. Every inch is a gain. There's no loss at any instance. We don't lose anything. We are gaining on all areas. And I'm repeating that because the world is a hologram. So there cannot be any loss. All felt losses within are caused by that. Every time you feel any type of unsatisfaction, it's because of this. Because your thinking process is sort of distorted or fragmented by the central perspective. So insatisfaction is caused by this and nothing else. And that's the idea of Rappaport. All dissatisfaction is caused by this. Because the absolute fullness in thinking, balance, coordination, knowledge, which is very, very important, but also the sense of being at home, being calm, happy, joy. Those things that usually are called in science, while that belongs to the personal sphere, that belongs to what you do at home, that's subjective. It's not at all like that in quantum physics. And this is really odd. Of course, you won't hear that much from Bohr, but it's the same quantum physics. He wasn't that interested in those things. It's mentioned a little more by Heisenberg and Schrödinger, but you get it even more from Bohm. That dissatisfaction we feel in life, the boredom, the lack of complete pleasure in everything, to partake, to be present. All that gets lost when you project. So you have all the goodies here. And that needs to be established. The reason is we will never ever put that sort of mental energy to understand it otherwise if we don't understand that. Rappaport is really clear on that. If you don't know what's waiting for you, you won't put that effort. Because it takes quite a deal. Because opening up and widening It's easy some days, but other days could be very strenuous. It takes effort to widen. And the reason is not being, it actually takes an effort. No, it's the habit. And remember, this habit is established your whole lifetime. It's even worse than that. It's established thousands of years before. It's like an etymology of narrowing. It's an etymology of what Heidegger calls amnesia, the forgetfulness. What have you forgotten? We have forgotten the fullness of experience, because everything is affected of this. So this is one of the points that are more interesting. A point that we usually would call psychological or emotional, but it is more than that, because in order to understand this wider picture, you need to see what's in it for you. Your system needs to know that something better is going on. And it's not an encouragement talk. This is a characteristic of the wider Klein bottle. It contains all those things. And that is because even though we don't have traits in the regular manner, we have doings. And one doing is to learn something new. And to learn such a difficult thing, weird thing, your body needs to know that something fantastic is around the corner. All the answers somehow. Let's see how I can you can compare two people. I was thinking of that earlier on when I was just sitting and relaxed for a while. And Ian McGilchrist, he seemed to be more on the mission here. I get the feeling he wants to help humankind somehow. He seems to be a very good person. Whereas Rappaport is more than happy to keep this information for himself. And I start to understand why. He had great use for this in his private life and in his working life. You can make a career much easier with this information, because it widens everything. It widens your thinking process. And when you start to understand what the limits are, you can go in and open up the limits. You can have both of the sides. Because we usually limit ourselves by saying, this is inside, that's outside. This is what I like, that is what I dislike. This is the positive side, that's the negative side. And for every time we do this, we're getting rid of things. We're getting less whole. And the view on knowledge in the central perspective is knowledge are limited information bits, like little bags that you keep somewhere. But what happens? You just pile them up and they're all different. That doesn't really feel like knowledge. It feels more like Trivial Pursuit. Knowledge is something embodied, whole. And if you get that whole, this hologram, you can from the hologram without any problem produce whatever you want at that instant. I should give you an example here. I think Winston Churchill is a good example. Every time somebody asked him anything in the House of Commons, he had a reply that was that quick. How could he do that? Even though the questions were coming from all directions, all aspects, he could not be prepared for that area. And this is the fantastic thing with the hologram. If you get that knowledge, hologrammatic knowledge, instead of those little bags, you can produce explicit knowledge of all type. You will not be lacking answers. You will be like Winston Churchill. You'll be quicker than fire, as they usually say, quicker than the flash. And that is true knowledge. True knowledge doesn't have one specific explicit form. True knowledge is the implicit that can produce all varieties of explicit forms. So it's broader in a way. But we make do with one explicit form. And it's even so bad that some people say that explicit form has a specific meaning. Like that word has a specific meaning. And that's narrowing the whole thing even more. In the end, the information bits are so narrow they become only usable in a certain context, with a certain question, in a certain connection. It gets very limited. Whereas the hologrammatic knowledge could be used in much more circumstances, different contexts, different times, with different people, for different reasons. And this is the good thing with the hologram. Hologrammatic knowledge contains so much more. And this is, in this case, it's exactly like the hologram. Every time I think about the hologram, I start understanding that it's a brilliant metaphor. It's a brilliant metaphor. Because I can use my camera the whole day. I can take photos. I have a friend, his camera showed 450,000 photos. 450,000 photos. He is a very keen photographer. I don't know how many times But from one hologram you can get much more photos than that. And that's reality. You can think for yourself. If you have any contact to that reality, every knowledge bit you have is going to be more holographic and contain so much more. And this is one of the reasons Carl Pribram chose the holographic idea of the brain. Because we know the brain cannot store knowledge photographically, like in this fashion. Because in that case, the human brain would have to be in the size of at least 10 meters high, 10 meters tall, 10 meters broad, 10 meters wide. It had to be enormous. But a hologram has a capacity to store knowledge which is just beyond belief. And we are making do with photographic knowledge. This is incredibly limited. And this is very close to just having one meaning or one word and just learning something that has to be expressed just in that certain way. And also, you only get the surface. You don't get the depth. And this is one of the reasons there's just gain here. You don't lose anything. There's no possibility of any loss. I don't know if I mentioned this, but I wished that I could go back in time and give William Blake one of those holograms. Because even though he defended the abundance, and he knew intuitively like an artist that there were more to the world and the central perspective of Newton. But sometimes when I read William Blake, he seems defenseless. He seems too aggravated with Newton. Well, you can blame Newton, but it doesn't help to blame Newton. You need to understand his limitations are more or less just an illusion. When you understand that you can find the knowledge anywhere, anyway, you don't have to be bound by the idea that Newton destroyed anything. And I think the hologram would have helped William Blake a lot. But still, his poems are very apt to the hologram. In a grain of sand you can see the whole world, and in an instant, eternity could be fathomed. So those poems are absolutely correct when they come to the hologram. And the hologram is a real thing of this world. You can hold it in your hand. But it becomes much more interesting when you start to understand the theory behind it. Because just looking at it, you will think, well, it's just a toy somehow. Now you need to understand, crush the hologram, make it into such a small pieces you won't even believe. Even at an almost microscopic level, that little piece will contain the whole of the hologram. And this is how reality works. We know this is actual space. Space is not as limited as the Newtonian space. It's never been. And that's why William Blake was partly wrong in pointing towards Newton. He said, he destroyed everything. Well, Newton might have been the biggest genius in the past millennia, but he can't take space away from reality. He doesn't have that power. No one has that power, not even Newton. He can create an illusion that he believed in, but William Blake didn't have to believe in it. But that's why, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, we need models. We need something that we can put our eyes to and that we can investigate with words, definitions, because they are going to help us to understand the other reality. And that need to be embodied as well. It's not enough with all the argument. They do help, yes, but that's not enough. Because we are literally bound by the old picture, the old gestalt. We think that's real. So 1,000 arguments and you will still believe the picture, the embodied picture. And this is what the Klein bottle do. It changes the perception from the bottom up. You see possibilities. And here's a very good example. What we usually see as reality, it's like the matrushka, the doll, the Russian doll. I always thought it was called the babushka, but it's called the matrushka. And it's like one doll within another doll, within an inner doll, within another doll. And that's how we are layering information. We widen the information and we broaden the information. But the only problem is the Matryoshka doesn't see herself. There needs to be an observer somehow. And then we have to put in the panopticon or something looking at the Matryoshka. This is not how space works. This is how we think space works. What is happening, space is at every level penetrating itself. It's informing itself. It's its own representation. It's a special movement. And this is almost exactly what David Bohm called the hollow movement. And that's the movement in between implicit going to the explicit, going further to the implicit. It's a movement. And that same movement we've been pinpointing before in the ambigram. Nothing moves, your eyes don't move, your pupil don't move, nothing happens in the brain, but there is still a movement there. And this movement is not Newtonian, it's more fundamental than that. And this movement everything is stemming from. And this is exactly the movement in the Klein bottle, because it's not still. It's moving into itself. I don't know if I have a good picture of the Klein bottle here. I don't. I will produce a good picture of the Klein bottle next time. But just to show, it's penetrating itself and it's locking the outside with the inside. And this is called typology. But topology is the science of learning space. So we know by now that this is the function of space. And all of a sudden you realize, well, I can see the subject in space and I can see the object, the observer and the observed. And they look different. They are distinct, yes, but they're also the same. And in the movement of the observance, seeing the object, defining the object, this is exactly the penetrating effect in the Klein bottle. So there is a definite similarity here. And it seems that Rappaport and David Bohm came to what I feel, this is my perception, similar ideas from so different angles. It's very interesting. There are citations from David Bohm in Rappaport, not in this article, but in other articles. But they seem to be a bit at the distance, not at the core. So they seem that it seems that the knowledge coming from Rappaport about the Kleinbarton and typology and mathematics seem to coincide in a way that's very interesting with David Bohm. His ideas of the true working of space. One can also say that space is informing itself. Everything comes from space and it goes back into space. What's explicit comes from space, what's implicit comes from space. So representation is not otherworldly. And to say that representation is otherworldly is the same as blocking out knowledge, saying, I won't look that direction. And every time you do that, you divide your world into two. You make a division. So every thought, every act will divide the world into two. And the other part of your world is going to be unknown. And the interesting thing, it doesn't matter if it's space like we ordinarily talk about or if it's mental space. You do the same there by having contradictions. Every time I try to make a conclusion by a contradiction, I block an area out. And that was also the point of Derrida. The author is killing the text by using contradictions, by using polarities. And what Derrida was to heal the text, to give its force back, to show that the author had greater power of transferring his own thinking, his own intention, his energy into the text. He's healing the text because marginalization and prioritizing is taking things away from the whole thing. And that's the idea of the undivided wholeness. And from the undivided wholeness is where we all are coming from. And there you have the great source of knowledge, space and time, because there's a time component to this as well. They also show how time is part of space. The penetration of the Klein bottle into itself is the working of space, but that's also time. It takes some time for space to penetrate itself. So the answer, the contrapunct coming from Lully. Lully is a French composer, and he's said to be the inventor of contrapunct. And contrapunct is a magical musical device. And I would say this is the contrapunct of this lecture. Our Gestalt our perception of reality is coming from the Klein bottle. So what we're perceiving, what we're thinking, what we have in ourselves, our lack of satisfaction, our lack of balance, is coming from a total balance. It's coming from a wholeness, an undivided wholeness. And the reason for our insatisfaction in the common world is because of that division. There's no other reason. And actually there cannot be any other reason. That's the reason for all the suffering in the world. It's the parting of the world in one bit I don't like or I marginalize, and one bit I say I'm going to prioritize. This is taking away space, it's taking away time, it's taking away knowledge. So it's partly an amazing healing process. And I think when it gets tough, because it gets tough, we are so used with the limitations, you get accustomed with it. I think who wrote, what was it, Oscar Wilde, when he had his stint in prison, that wrote that many prisoners get so used to the little cell and the meager food and the lack of space that they prefer that. I think he saw a man that was supposed to be released after having spent like 10-15 years in prison, but he didn't want to leave. He was so accustomed to it. And this is one of the major problems. We are so accustomed to the limitations that we mistake them for something solid, something safe. But trust me, there's no safety in the central perspective. It just lacks everything that we need. But it's obvious when you read those famous philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, they all have this inner complaint of lack, unhappiness, that they don't understand the world. Heck, Plato tried to understand the world his whole life. Himself admits he knew nothing. He learned nothing during his whole lifetime. And what happens? The little we have, we try to hold tighter, tighter, tighter. And we won't give up. We're trapped that way. And this is an extraordinary important point that Rappaport does, and is that motivation is incredibly important. It's not something that's outside the problem. Actually, it's the most important problem. You need to encourage people to see that is something fantastic. Otherwise, they will stick with what they have. If it's not marvelous, if it's not a fantastic dream, you won't do anything. So, well, I think I'm going to round up here. My colleague is getting a little bit tired. But to round things up, Rappaport is, even though he is very, very dense in the beginning, I have to say that even if you're listening, Rappaport, I see after a while here, it's like a flower opening up. And the complete understanding of the marvels of the bigger picture is incredibly interesting. And this is one of the most intelligent things I read for a very, very long time. It's very insightful. And I think this is a bit of hope for humanity. But first, we need to make this trip ourselves. And I hope I put on the first stepping stone. Now it's just the remainder, 22, 24, or whatever they could be. Well, the ladder, why not? Okay, thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye.
Thank you.